Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I wasn't going to post this, but my friend convinced me to. So I work at a grocery store and it was pretty slow today. I was super bored and had like 2 hours left in my shift, so I was wandering around and I was looking for my friend who was also my co-worker. Right as I was rounding the corner to the produce section, I heard people arguing near the winery and a crying baby. Me, being curious and bored, decided to check it out. Well, turns out it was my friend. He was arguing with this woman with an oversized baby bag and a stroller with what looked to be a pretty irritated baby. I walked up to them to try and mediate the situation. This woman looked to be around her mid-30s. She had obnoxiously and obviously dyed blonde hair and a horrible tan. She looked super irritated when she saw me and rolled her eyes when I started to talk to her. Turns out she had been stealing wine. She was stuffing wine bottles in her baby bag and even hid one behind her baby, which explains its crying. Laying on top of a wine bottle can be comfortable. My friend had caught her stuffing one of the bottles in her bag, which led to their little argument. When I finally got the context to the situation, I then asked the lady to return the bottles since it was obvious she wasn't going to buy them. Then she started to get irate. "Ma'am, you need to return these wine bottles. They are store property." "No," my friend tells her, "you need to give these back. I caught you in your attempt to steal them and you need to put them back. I'm a tax-paying citizen. I basically own this store. You wouldn't have jobs without me." At this point, the situation was escalating way too much, and other people were beginning to look at us. Eventually, my manager came out to see what was up. My friend and I were in the middle of explaining the situation to him, and the lady just took off. She left her stroller behind, by the way. My manager radioed our store security and they stopped her at the entrance. I had to push her stroller over to where the guards were keeping her. When the crazy woman realized she wasn't going to get away, she took one of the bottles in her bag and threw it at the manager. It barely missed his head, and it was pretty bad. The security guards had to tackle her to stop her from getting out another bottle. One of my other co-workers called the police and my manager was so mad, he was screaming at the lady. I don't know if he will be pressing charges against her or not. I was put in charge of taking the rest of the wine bottles and had to put them away. My friend was trying to calm down her still crying baby. The police eventually came and they are in the process of arresting her. Update. So my manager is pressing charges. Child Protective Services was called on a lady, but it turns out the baby wasn't even her kid. It was her niece. She was supposed to be babysitting and took her baby to the store. The baby's mother, the entitled mother's sister, apologized profusely to my manager and explained everything. She said her sister was a known alcoholic and a substance addict, but had been telling her and her family that she had been clean for 3 years and that she had gone to rehab. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. I personally would never leave my baby with a known abuser, no matter how clean they claim to be, but that's just my opinion. The mother told us that she's a single mom and she had to work overtime and needed someone to watch her daughter for a couple of hours. Her regular sitter couldn't come and her parents were on vacation. So she decided to take a chance on her sister. She had no idea that she was this unhinged. The entitled woman was arrested for shoplifting and attempted assault with a deadly weapon. My manager is pressing charges for emotional distress. Child Protective Services let the mother keep her baby, but I'm pretty sure they are going to be conducting a search on the baby's living conditions. I feel so bad for her, honestly. My friend and I were also reprimanded for confronting a shoplifter because that does go against store policy, and he unleashed a bunch of chaos by doing so. I understand why we aren't allowed to, but I couldn't in good conscience watch an unhinged woman possibly endanger a baby. So yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So, some background. I'm 32, live in the UK and have 2 sons. I also have a very low tolerance for political correctness and zero tolerance for people getting involved in things that don't bother themselves. My son's one is 6 and the other is 4 weeks old. My oldest son is deaf, wears hearing aids but mainly lip reads, and because of this, when I go to the shops with him, I don't wear a face mask as otherwise I cannot communicate with him. When I'm on my own, no problem wearing a mask though. So Saturday I took both my sons out to the shops to give my wife some peace and some time to sleep as your youngest had had a rough night's sleep. So we went to our local Sainsbury's supermarket to get some bits to make pizzas in the evening. I have my lanyard on and the door staff don't even question it. We are walking down the cold meat aisle to get some toppings for pizzas when a middle-aged woman, probably mid-50s, comes up to me and says the following to me. "I think what you're doing is disgusting." I look around to see who she could be talking to. No one else around, so I respond, "Are you talking to me?" "Yes, you. How dare you walk around with no face mask on?" "I have a lanyard on. I'm exempt from love." "What kind of example are you setting for your children?" "Not that I should need to explain myself to you, but my son is deaf and lip reads. How is he meant to lip read with me wearing a mask?" "It's disgusting. I'll be speaking to the manager." When her partner/husband arrived and he heard the end of our conversation, he proceeded to say, "I told you, Karen, the boy is wearing hearing aids and will most likely lip read." At this point, my youngest has woken up screaming either hungry or wanting a change. My final words to this woman were, "I'm glad you're wearing your face mask." She looked all confused, so I explained, "Because it hides your hideous ugly face." And I casually walked off. All I hear is her saying to her partner/husband, "Are you going to let him talk to me like that?" He replies, "I told you the boy was wearing hearing aids and the dad has a lanyard on. Why you didn't listen? That's all on you." We finished up our shop and carried on with our day. After the shops, we went to the park so my oldest can run around and play and tire himself out a little. Just as we were getting ready to leave the shops, my wife calls me asking me to grab some more milk and milk formula. So back to Sainsbury's we go. Same again, no mask, lanyard on, no problem from the store staff. I get milk and baby formula, we head to the tills. We go to the 5 items or list till. There is a man in front of me who has done the same as me. Brought the kids out of the house so wife can have a break. 2 kids very similar age to mine. He has milk, baby formula, nappies, wipes, and some bacon on a belt. His oldest asks if he can have a chocolate bar, and of course, the dad says yes. The boy goes to get a chocolate bar and puts it on a belt, when all of a sudden Karen behind me pipes up. She says to the cashier she would like to speak to the manager as soon as possible. The cashier is no more than 18 and just grabs the manager. Karen waits for the manager to come over, all while tapping her foot on the ground. "Yes, ma'am. What seems to be the problem?" "This man has 6 items. This is 5 items or less." I hear this and turn around and say, "Are you serious?" Other people turn around and start watching. Could almost hear popcorn being made in excitement. This man has items for his baby and his son wants a chocolate bar. And you're complaining about this small boy having a chocolate bar as it goes over the 5 items? Yes, it's 5 items or less. And these are 6 items. I snapped. I say very loudly, by a show of hands, who here wants this boy to have his chocolate bar? There was a show of hands and a few cheers. Who here votes that this is a miserable old bat and needs to lighten up and jog on? The people around were like, "Oh no, he went there." She didn't respond to this. The store staff had smiles on their faces but obviously couldn't say anything. I took the chocolate bar from the man's items and put it on mine so I had 3 items. "Are you happy now? This man only has 5 items and I have 3. Do you have a problem with this?" No response from her. The dad in front was very grateful and his oldest even more for his chocolate. The Karen stood in silence as we left. I would say I wish her a good day and hope she lightens up, but that would be a lie. I came home to a refreshed wife and told her what happened, and she was in tears. If she had been with me, she would have stopped me as she gets embarrassed easily. Moral of the story, concern yourself with yourself. But do not deprive a young child of a treat because you happen to be a Karen. Besides an encounter 30 years ago with a mom who thought the sun shined out of her kids, I hadn't experienced any of these crazy people. That changed about 2 hours ago. Some important and relevant backstory first. 18 months ago, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. It wasn't long before I had to have surgery to remove the tumor. It was an 18-hour surgery. They removed about a foot of my large colon and 18 lymph nodes. I woke up in the ICU. When I finally looked down, I had a long scar running down the center of my body. It starts just below my chest and runs past my belly button to just above my pubes. I also have a reversible colostomy. It's important to understand that I have what's called an appliance stuck to the side of my torso that collects my poop. I have to then empty the bag instead of pooping. I also have to change the whole appliance every 4 days. I will soon be able to have my colon put back together and no longer deal with this thing. Anyway, this morning I was at one of those large office buildings next to a hospital. I was waiting to see my surgeon to discuss when he was going to reconnect my colon. This place has one of those enormous waiting rooms for multiple doctors. I know there is going to be a long wait as my surgeon is very much in demand. So I brought my Nintendo Switch. I was sitting playing my game for a few minutes when the entitled dad and the entitled kid sat near me. I hear the kid say, "Wow, Dad, look, that guy has a Switch." He just says, "Yeah, I see." I'm very outgoing and love to talk, so I asked the father if he mind if I play a few games with his son. The father at this point seems perfectly normal and says, "Yeah, no problem." The kid looked to be around 10 or 11. I'm in my mid-30s but have been a lifelong gamer. I also have 7 nieces and nephews, so I play games with kids his age all the time. I placed the Switch on a side table near us and handed the kid one of the Joy-Cons. We played a couple races before he asked what else I had. I brought out Smash Bros. Ultimate and the kid was jumping up and down. We played Smash for nearly an hour before I heard my name called. I raised my hand and said, "Here." So the nurse saw me and I quickly grabbed my Joy-Con from his hands and packed the Switch away in my backpack and began walking towards the nurse. Just as I make it to the nurse, I feel someone tap my shoulder. The entitled dad says, "Hey man, can you let my son play your Switch while you're in with the doctor?" "Sorry man, I had a blast playing with him, but who knows if he'll be here when I get back," I responded. "So you're an adult, why do you need it anyway?" I was astounded. So I just turned to follow the nurse who was holding the door open for me. It's important to note that during the hour I was playing with the kid, my ostomy became active and started filling. At this point it was more than half full. I am wearing a t-shirt so you can see the outline of it when this happens. Just to give you context, a few weeks ago a police officer thought I was carrying a gun under my shirt because of this. So it looks like there is something large in my front pocket. The entitled dad says, "You fat jerk, you're going to give my son the game or else." The nurse finally says, "Sir, please leave the man alone." I appreciate the attempt, but it sounded rather weak. The guy was about 6'4" and looked like a weightlifter, so I guess he was used to intimidating other people. As he alluded to, I'm a large guy. I'm about 6'2" and I'm overweight, so I'm used to not being intimidated. I responded with, "Not gonna happen." He decided to make it physical. I was only half facing him. He grabbed my shoulder, spun me around to face me, and with his other hand started trying to get under my shirt. He's yelling, Give me, you fat jerk." He eventually gets a hold of my appliance and pulls as hard as he can. I don't know how he thought it was a game because, well, it's soft. I screamed in pain because the adhesives that hold this thing on are strong. He actually managed to rip some of my skin off. The bag is perfectly sealed while it's attached to me. But as he pulled it towards himself, a bunch of poop came flying out all over his shirt, pants, and shoes. When he pulled it, he turned it upside down while trying to cup it in his grasp, and he began to run away. He realized something was wrong halfway through his turn. I got a little bit of my shirt, but the bleeding was a problem. The nurse led me quickly back into the room and I had my surgeon in the room in a matter of seconds, making sure I was okay. I kept a spare appliance in my bag, so I was back in business in no time. I washed my shirt out in the sink. Only a very small part got any on it, and it was easy to clean with soap and water. It got me home at least. I later found out that the man just stood there for a while, stunned. The front desk people were laughing when they told me this. They said he seemed completely shocked that it wasn't a game. Apparently, he dropped the appliance and yelled for his son and tried to leave. Security caught up to him pretty quick and he was arrested. I have to go and make a statement tomorrow. Update. I just came out from giving my official statement. I'm typing this in my car. I was expecting to go see a police officer this morning. I got a call over an hour ago from a lawyer from the prosecutor's office. She asked me to come to her office instead. I went to her office. Apparently, the entitled dad was arrested and was released. I also caused a bit of an argument in the prosecutor's office. Two of the lawyers were arguing over whether grabbing my bag was assault or theft. One was arguing it was part of my body while the other argued it was my property. When I arrived, the woman explained that for the moment, he was only charged with a misdemeanor. However, once they settle the issue, they will be adding a further charge. I wasn't told any of this until I gave my statement. She told me the chances of him going to trial is slim, so I probably won't have to testify. Oh, and I had no say in whether he was prosecuted. He was being prosecuted whether or not I gave a statement because of all the witnesses. I work as a developer at a small-ish IT company that has, before my involvement, offered a range of products and services on-premise as our customers. A couple of years ago, we started to offer our services and products as a hosted solution as well. This is where I come in. Over the course of a year, me and one other colleague, let's call him Jeff, ported our products to be suited for a multi-tenant environment. This took a fair amount of work as the original products were not suited for multi-tenancy at all. So in the end, we ended up pretty much rewriting everything. Jeff and I were a good team. Our skills complemented each other nicely. Jeff was always a more technical guy, so he was in charge of the server admin stuff. Together with the system's core and security features, I was much more focused on the functional side of the products. I did everything from customer interaction to implementing their workflows to making sure it all looked good and integrated well with the other applications of our customers. In short, while Jeff knew much more of the back end of our products, I knew what was actually happening in it. This of course meant that every single support request for our hosted solution ended up on my desk. The overwhelming majority of those requests were quick and simple fixes. Small edits to a workflow here, rerunning a batch job there, that kind of stuff. While I did need Jeff here and there, I was able to do about 90% of those requests myself within about 5 minutes. Sure, we had a technical support team, but they were much more focused on the on-premise customers, and with a hosted solution being significantly different at this point, a little knowledge of the hosted products. I'll cut out a bit in the middle, but about 2 years and a number of reorganizations later, we've ended up at the situation where one of our support staff members, she'll be known as Lisa in this story, knows a fair bit about the hosted system. Jeff has moved to the support team in order to keep our hosted environment running smoothly. Between them, they are able to handle about 80% of the support requests that would normally have filtered down to me. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where the support manager, we will call him Steve, doesn't like me very much. Sure, Steve is a good manager, he takes care of his staff and is a great guy to work with if you're on his good side. Nevertheless, I am not. I have full access to everything while he doesn't. And it doesn't sit well with him that I, a measly developer, have more access than him, a manager. Last year, as I returned from holiday, I found all my rights on the production environment and all but a few on the test environment revoked. Jeff explained to me that there has been an audit, and one of the results was that while I was still doing a lot on the operational side, that wasn't well documented. The level of access that I had did not match the level that suited my job description, and instead of changing the job description, Steve opted to revoke all my rights. What if I need to do insert random task that I still found myself with astonishing frequency? I asked Steve. Steve grinned and said, "We can give you temporary rights, but you'll need a ticket for that." Cue the malicious compliance. I started making a ticket for temporary rights for every single issue that I needed them for. By the end of the week, I had over 100 tickets on my name. The issues that Lisa used to handle were queuing up, as well as she spent more time granting and revoking my access than she was solving the issues that she could solve on her own. Morale, customer satisfaction, and ticket resolution scores, essentially an inverse of the amount of time a ticket spent waiting for support action, quickly dropped in unison. Steve doubled down. The problem wasn't with the access management. The problem was with my blatant abuse of the ticketing system, and therefore a new rule was set in place that I was not to be granted access to any of the hosted systems at all anymore. Instead, I was to describe my actions in a request for change RFC document, which could then be handled by Lisa or Jeff. Of course, every change still had to be approved by the change manager, which of course so happened to be Steve. Great. Now, issues that took me 5 minutes to fix will take me half an hour to write out. I need to spill out every bit of impact that a change will have, and in such a way that Steve, who is by all means not a technician, understands what I'm talking about. Then Lisa or Jeff will have to make the changes. Of course, if anything unexpected happens, they'll have to roll back, and I'll have to figure out what happened and amend the RFC to cope. All in all, something that used to take me 5 minutes now takes an hour and a half at best. At this point, my productivity is down pretty much 100%. Upper management has noticed this as well. Hearing my explanation and seeing my by now extensive paper trail, they intervene by doing the one thing they could reasonably do. They amend my job description to cover the additional tasks that I've been doing since building the system. And with that, Steve has no choice but to reinstate the access that I've had before. Steve still doesn't like me, but at least now the customers get their issues resolved. I'm a high school teacher. One of the things that teachers deal with are individual education plans, IEPs. An IEP is for a student with disabilities, learning, developmental, and so on. An IEP will outline exactly what accommodations a student is entitled to. These are very necessary and very important. Legally binding documents which outline a student's disability as it relates to academic performance and provide accommodations to help the student succeed in school. Common accommodations include may use a calculator on math tests, may have test questions read aloud to him/her, may receive extra time on timed tests, and may take tests in the resource room instead of the academic classroom. It is that last accommodation that is important for this story. If you're unfamiliar, a resource room is a classroom of the special education teacher. While the special education students spend 90% of their day in the same classrooms as other students, they will occasionally return to their special ED teacher's room, the resource room for things like study hall, homeroom, or take a test. The special ED teacher assigned to help monitor the student's progress is known as a teacher of record, or TOR for short. Billy was one of my students last year. He was a bright, outgoing, and very active student. However, Billy also did have a few learning disabilities that caused him to struggle in class. Because of these disabilities, May take tests and quizzes in the resource room instead of the academic classroom was a very important part of his individual education plans. This cut down on distractions and was to help Billy concentrate on his test. After about a half a year of Billy doing well in class, he unexpectedly failed the test in my class. The teacher of record, Mrs. Ratchet, was really upset that Billy didn't do well on that test. She monitored his grades through our online system, so she knew he failed the test less than 10 minutes after I had graded it. In order to get to the bottom of why, she stopped by my classroom after the students had gone home for the day. "Mr. Onyx, why did Billy fail his test?" I'm not sure. He normally does well on the tests, but this one seemed to stump him. I'm going to talk to him about it tomorrow. Did you follow his individual education plans? Yes, I did. I offered to let him take the test in the resource room, but he elected to take it in class since it was not a long test. It should be noted that individual education plans accommodations are generally elective, meaning that the student can choose not to use a specific accommodation at any given point if he/she does not wish to. This does not stop him/her from using that same accommodation later. The only time an accommodation is mandatory is if the parents request that it be so. It's reflected in the individual education plans when that happens, but it's exceedingly rare. But, Mrs. Ratchet continued, Billy's individual education plan states that he gets time and a half on tests. I'm aware, I explained. However, this was not a timed test. All the students had as much time as they needed. If a student didn't finish during today's class period, they could finish the test tomorrow. All students, including Billy, finished today. He gets time and a half. Yes, he does. But as I said, this was not a timed test. There was unlimited time for all the students, including Billy. I'm not going to file a non-compliance report on this, but I want you to know that I expect you, the state expects you, to follow individual education plans to the letter. You should not have allowed him to take the test in class. He should have received more time than other students. You dropped the ball on this one, and I expect it not to happen again. She then stormed out. Now Billy had chosen to take the test in class, something he very rarely did. I'm not sure why Mrs. Ratchet was so incensed that he hadn't taken the test in her room, since it was Billy's decision, but whatever. As for the time, that was a non-issue. You can't give time and a half for unlimited time. So I ignored that complaint. A few weeks later, Billy had a quiz in my class. This was a very short 10-question quiz. Again, Billy elected to stay in my room. Again, sadly, Billy failed the quiz. That triggered round 2 with Mrs. Ratchet. What is wrong with you, Mr. Onyx? She demanded as she stormed into my room the day the quiz grades were uploaded to our grading system. Billy should be in my room taking these tests and quizzes. Well, Billy chose not to. I offered him the opportunity to take the quiz in your room, but he chose not to. I cannot force him. I am getting very tired of your disregard of individual education plans. I am going to be filing a non-compliance report with the administration. I knew I had done nothing wrong, so I wasn't worried, as I suspected the administration dismissed her complaint as being without merit, and I went on my way. Then about 2 weeks after the complaint was filed and dismissed, I got an updated individual education plans for Billy. It seems Mrs. Ratchet was not happy about Billy failing tests and quizzes when he took them in the academic classroom as opposed to the resource room. As a result, she called up Billy's parents and, through conference with them, got his individual education plans changed. Instead of Billy may take tests and quizzes in a resource room, it now read Billy must take tests and quizzes in a resource room under the supervision of the teacher of record. The last 8 words of that mandate caught my eye. Under the supervision of the teacher of record. This meant that, as TOR, Mrs. Ratchet is now legally mandated to be present in her classroom every time Billy takes a test or a quiz. Since Special ED has instructional assistants, IA as well as licensed teachers in a room at all times, it is not usually a problem if the TOR is out of the room, since an IA will be in there. Nope, not anymore. I was still pissed at Mrs. Ratchet for her non-compliance complaint against me, even though it got dismissed. I was also pissed at her making demands of me as if I worked for her. I was following the law, following Billy's individual education plans, and I would be damned if I was going to let anyone tell me I wasn't. Enter the malicious compliance. Every teacher, including special ED teachers, gets a prep period. These periods are periods in which we don't have a class. I use mine for grading and making copies. Some teachers use them to plan for the extracurricular activities they coach or direct. Mrs. Ratchet I knew used hers to hang out down the hall in the classroom of her best friend, a biology teacher who was the same prep period as her. If a student had a test or quiz to take, it wouldn't be an issue normally. An IA would be in the room so that TOR didn't have to be. Well, except for Billy. Now you see, Mrs. Ratchet's prep period was the same period in which I had Billy in class. About a week after the new individual education plans was handed down, I had another quiz in class. Unfortunately for Billy, as I explained to him, his parents and Mrs. Ratchet had decided that he had to take quizzes and tests in Mrs. Ratchet's room. He wasn't happy, but his individual education plans were not vague on this point. Knowing Mrs. Ratchet wouldn't be in a classroom, I took Billy down to Mrs. Ratchet's room myself. Having my own IA, who was only in my room because of Billy, watched the class. When I got there, I asked the IA where Mrs. Ratchet was. She's in Miss Bio teacher's room. She kindly explained. Alright, I said. Billy, have a seat and I'll go get Mrs. Ratchet. Mrs. Ratchet, I said a few moments later as I got to Miss Biology teacher's room. Billy needs to take a quiz. We need you down in your room to supervise. Miss IA, the instructional assistant, is there, she said with a dismissive wave. She can handle it. Oh no, she can't, I explained with a smile. You see, I am, as you reminded me, expected to follow Billy's individual education plans to the letter. His individual education plans say that he must take tests and quizzes in a resource room under the supervision of the teacher of record. As his teacher of record, I'm afraid that you are required to be there. It would be non-compliance for me to leave the supervision of his quiz up to Ms. IA. She looks pissed. I knew that she had backed herself into a corner. Reluctantly and obviously fuming, she left Miss Bio teacher's room and returned to her room. For the remainder of the year, every test and quiz I assigned to Billy required that Mrs. Ratchet give up her prep period in order to supervise. There weren't a lot of them, but I really enjoyed twisting the knife every so often just to remind her that it was her actions which forced this. Later, from what I've been told, she tried to get Billy's parents to change the individual education plans to state may instead of must. They liked the must, and they kept it in. Edit. I've addressed a couple things a few times in the comments, but I want to point out that I have no evidence that there was cheating going on in the resource room, nor do I have any reason to think that there was a bad relationship between Billy, Mrs. Ratchet, and her IAs. Quite honestly, the reason Billy chose to stay in my room a couple of times was because those two assessments were short tests and quizzes, and like all kids, Billy just didn't want to spend the time walking down to Mrs. Ratchet's room. Also, like all the kids, Billy was just not prepared for those tests, hence him failing. For the couple of people who questioned why I let him stay in my room for the quiz after he had failed the first test, please keep in mind that his individual education plans at that point stated may take tests in the resource room. The key word here is may. The decision was his to make. I could encourage him, but not require him to take tests in a resource room. Well, until the individual education plans changed to must.